Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan M.S. Pierce. It's been a few days since I've done a live. I thought I had better do that because I've got a lot of geopolitical nuggets to consume in public with you guys. And I thought it's about time that I got on and did it. I hope you are all well in the live chat. If you're not watching this live, where are you? What are you doing with your life? Why aren't you here live? Goodness me, crazy times. Peace negotiations taking place at the moment. You know all the backdrop to that already with regard to the Ukraine war. By the way, today I'm going to start off talking about the Ukraine war. We're going to then look at Russia through UK politics and then move on to American politics. We're going to talk about an awful lot today. Hopefully you'll be here for it all. I think you can connect many of these things together, and understanding what's going on in the United States is actually very relevant to understanding how the United States deals with Ukraine and Russia, so on and so forth. But yeah, so we are at a point where it looks like there is an agreement that is close to being finalized is the wrong word, but agreed upon, I guess, to use the term again, agreed upon by Zelensky and indeed Trump, as we hear. And it might well involve the constriction of the Ukrainian armed forces to 800,000, which is pretty incredible. But we'll get to that in a second. We'll start elsewhere. If you have any questions, obviously you put them into the live chat. I'll try and read them. It's easier, and I'm not saying this for any kind of financial gain. It's easier if they are a super chat because they flash up in a certain color to me, and the interface I can read them more easily. But when I'm on my own, I struggle. So I guess if you have a genuine question you want answering, put a big capitals question and then write your question. But I can't promise to get to them. There'll be a lot to talk about. Okay, right. We are going to start with just, I guess, some positives here. In point of fact, positives in reacting to negatives. So there have been mass rallies of supporting Ukraine taking place in US cities, including Los Angeles, Chicago, Washington, New York, and Boston, demanding that an agreement not be approved, which the diaspora says would legitimize Russian aggression and force Kiev to accept Moscow's terms. Now, I don't know how big mass really is. I don't think they're particularly large rallies, but it's good to see Ukrainian diaspora communities coming together and shouting about what's taking place at the moment, because it's not looked good. And then it looked better because the Europeans seem to be really backing up Ukraine. And I talked about in my first video of today, Kaja Kallas in the EU really saying all the right things in a CNN interview and being very strong and very robust in terms of Ukraine not capitulating to Russia and the West and Ukrainian allies not giving Russia everything that Russia wants. Actually, they need to make some concessions. Then we understand, and this is coming from Politico apparently, that Marco Rubio, because he was involved in the discussions with Andriy Yermak and the Ukrainians and indeed the Europeans, but he refused to meet with the EU diplomat Kaja Kallas as discussions about Trump's peace initiative continued. The publication notes that Kallas has largely withdrawn from public diplomacy due to her difficult relationship with Trump's team. This is one of the reasons, by the way, that Kaja Kallas was not selected. She's a former Estonian premier, and people were thinking that she might become the Secretary General for NATO, which would have been an interesting appointment. But it was thought that she would be too abrasive with Trump. And actually, Mark Rutte is very good at being a slippery eel that says the right things into people's ears and calls Trump daddy and knows exactly how to deal with people like Trump. Whereas Kaja Kallas would be more aligned with what most of us would want and expect a leader to be, which is really robust, stand up strong, have a real backbone, stand up to Trump. But actually, in standing up to Trump, it would probably cause a permanent division in NATO, and that would be the end of NATO. So if you want NATO to survive as an entity, you need someone who's a bit more canny with dealing with Trump. And that means polishing his boots when his boots need polishing. And Kaja Kallas wouldn't do that. So this doesn't surprise me at all that she doesn't get on at all with Trump's team, and that means that she's been a bit sidelined in terms of negotiating with the Americans. Even Rubio, regarded as the administration's most pro-European high-ranking figure, is declining to engage in bilateral talks with her. Politico adds that Callas is, quote, acting as the bad cop, organising and guiding EU member states behind the scenes. And I guess there's still very much a need to make sure that people are cajoled into doing and saying the right things. So I guess Kaya Kallas there behind the scenes is probably doing a really good job, I'd hope. As this NAFO supporter says, Kaya Kallas would have torn him a new one. It's for their protection. She is, so many people, Kaya Kallas is so based, but also right on her path. We cannot be led by the weak men. I rather follow strong women like her than these weaklings. And but at the end of the day, good cop, bad cop, or strong cop, weak cop, or whatever, someone who's strong and robust and stands up for their principles isn't always the right person to get the right outcome. And that sounds horrible, because actually they are the most morally forthright and acting with that moral clarity, which I think Kaya Kallas does. I absolutely love Kaya Kallas. I think she's brilliant, but it is probably correct that Mark Rutte was the right person for the job for the aforementioned reasons, because Trump is the person he is, and you have to deal with him so completely differently. Now, we hear, according to the Financial Times, that and I was very surprised at this, because I thought the Europeans were saying, and as Kaya Kallas indeed said this morning, although she did a good job of switching bait, or when asked definite questions about like reducing the size of the army, saying actually this is not what blah blah blah, not saying yes or no to those things, so doing a typical diplomatic answers, but she was being really strong with them. The revised peace plan includes a major concession, according to the Financial Times, from Ukraine. It has agreed to limit its armed forces to 800,000 troops, with final details to be settled directly between Trump and Zelensky. Now, I have to say, this really pees me off. It doesn't surprise me, but it pees me off. This is where I guess Ukraine are having to say, look, we have to make some concessions here, and we can't just stick to, all of these points. But that was supposed to be a red line, right? And the reason why that's a red line is because as soon as you start constricting your armed forces, you are not being sovereign. And surely one of the prerequisites for these agreements is one of them should be that Ukraine retains its sovereignty. You say, okay, you can have your sovereignty, you remain a sovereign state, but by the way, you can't do this, you can't do that, and you can't do this. Oh, but those are all things that a sovereign state would determine themselves. That's kind of self-determination. No, you can't do them. So how are we a sovereign state then? Well, you're not fully a sovereign state. Okay, so we're not. Okay. So the idea that they would constrict the size of their armed forces is directly in contradiction to sovereignty. And also, if you're talking about a country that's been invaded by an aggressive neighbor, getting them to then constrain the size of their armed forces is only going to be something that will facilitate another invasion by the aggressive neighbor. So to me, this is unconscionable, and it shows that I think the US is still on the side of Russia here, because really that should be off the table. And I can't believe people won't be arguing the logic of this, like really logically, like hopefully I've set out. You say, well, surely you cannot agree that this is, the only people on earth that would want the armed forces of Ukraine to be smaller than they are would be Russia. And the only reason Russia would want them to be smaller is if they wanted to attack again. Ukraine are not a threat. They are not going to attack Russia. And so, nobody realistically believes that. And so, this bullet point on a peace plan is just ridiculous in my most humble of opinions. But the latest draft is less favorable to Moscow, leaving the most sensitive issues to be decided by Trump and Zelensky, says the FT. Senior Ukrainian officials close to the president told the FT on Tuesday that those included territorial issues and US security guarantees, but added that Kyiv had agreed to cap its army at 800,000. So here are my caveats. If I was Ukraine and I thought, right, we need to get Russia more likely to agree to this, so we do have to make some concessions. Practically, we're going to have to bend over and unfortunately, commit to giving some things to Russia that we really don't want to give. So if it's saying we have to reduce the size of our armed forces, the reality is, as far as I'm aware now, their armed forces practically about 900,000 now. So it's not a massive reduction, and it's not the 600,000 that was previously talked about, maybe even 500,000. So we're up to 800,000, much closer to where they are. But then I would just be like, right, we're going to have an internal security services, a beefed up police force or something like this that is trained the same as the armed forces, given slightly different uniform. And it turns out we've got 100,000 blue uniformed, effectively soldiers. So I wonder whether there are just ways that they can get around this that allow them to keep those military numbers up there. And of course, then you have the idea of reservists as well. So I don't know if there are stipulations over reservists, but anyway, I would hope that there are ways around that for the Ukrainians if they do agree to such. Right. Now, Trump's plan to resolve the war in Ukraine will require the consent of NATO members as it affects their interests, says British Prime Minister Keir Starmer. Keir Starmer shouldn't have to say stuff like this, but he indeed has to, because the US appears to be trying to make decisions on behalf of Europe, on behalf of NATO. And actually, NATO isn't just something that the US can assert over. This is a group of countries like the EU that have their own sovereignty and their own wishes and their own desires for the outcomes of this peace negotiation. And the US needs to understand that the input needs to come from all of these nations, and that includes NATO nations. So Keir Starmer just, I guess, politely reminding the president that's the case. Now, a spokesman for British Prime Minister Keir Starmer, when asked whether the UK is ready to deploy troops in Ukraine after any end to hostilities in the country, replied, "The commitment remains in force." Now, I guess that essentially says a bit without saying too much. It remains in force, as in we are willing to commit, and the coalition are willing. Indeed, coalition are willing is meeting right now. They're meeting as we speak. And Macron has also stated that he is very much still up for the coalition are willing, along with Turkey, and he was talking about 20 nations being ready to commit troops to support Ukraine in some kind of ceasefire arrangement. So yeah, I would hope that this isn't taken out of the plan that's now been agreed between Zelensky and I guess Rubio so far, that there will be able to be allied nations that will come to Ukraine's assistance inside Ukraine. Because otherwise, the security, again, it would just be Russia dictating ridiculous scenarios for a post ceasefire situation. Now, a meeting has begun, as mentioned, between the coalition of willing states led by Keir Starmer and Emmanuel Macron, the members of the self-proclaimed coalition of volunteers, to discuss developments regarding the peace plan for Ukraine. So I guess this isn't a whole meeting. This is just Macron doing it virtually from here into the big screen over there, and they're meeting with lots of other nations in a remote capacity. We have Sergei Lavrov here, the foreign minister for Russia, talking his usual typical stuff. Quote, "The only thing that is probably fair to say is that all smiles and hugs of Europeans toward Russian representatives before the Ukrainian crisis were just an act." I mean, that's ridiculous. They weren't an act. There were people like Angela Merkel was trying to get Russia on side through kind of osmosis, through I forget the name of the term, which is getting Russia in the inner circle or among friends, if you like, in order to change Russia in that way. She and many leaders thought that actually Putin was going to be this liberal reformer, as it was indicated early on, and then he became not that person. And I don't know whether he changed or whether this is always the case, but possibly money and power have a very poisoning effect. And Putin then went on and did what he did, but those in Europe were hoping that he would come over to the liberal, internationalist, globalist worldview and become a cooperative member of the European larger community. So yeah, there was this approach to trying to get him on side. Then 2014 happened, and then it's like, oh dear, well screw you, you're not the person we thought you were. And then 2022. But do you know what happened in 2014 and 2022? Putin decided to do these things. Like, don't look at Europeans as if, oh, they were all hugs and kisses then, but look at them now. They're not so nice now, are they? No, do you know why they're not nice? Because you freaking brought war to Europe. Biggest war since World War III. You gargantuan plonker. So, they pretended to be benevolent, but in reality, they always wanted harm and misfortune for Russia. Let's change that around. Putin pretended to be one of the Europeans, but in reality, he always wanted harm and give misfortune to Europe. Indeed, he attacked Europe kinetically with an army. So, sort of, Lavrov, you swear word, swear word, swear word, swear word, swear word. Okay, Caroline Levitt, White House press secretary, has stated that over the past week, the United States has made tremendous progress towards a peace deal by bringing both Ukraine and Russia to the table. There are a few delicate but not insurmountable details that must be sorted out and will require further talks between Ukraine, Russia, and the United States. So still, giving the indication that there are some surmountable, not insurmountable, so some surmountable details that need to be sorted out. Okay. Hooky Brick Shooky says, in my opinion, a real problem for Ukraine is not the maximum troop limit of 800,000, but rather that monitoring compliance with this limit constitutes constant interference from Russia. That is not something I considered. That's a really good point, which is, how do you know how many they have and who monitors? Are you going to have Russians inside Ukraine monitoring that? I presume that would be an international force that does that, to be honest. This will be policed by those who are overseeing the agreements. But yeah, interesting points. And as this is kind of the core, isn't it? Says Puste. I'm hoping that Russia declines a plan. I feel strongly that it would not benefit Ukraine to make any concessions. Russia's economy won't make it to the winter of 2026. So essentially, this is really what's going on at the moment. Like, does Ukraine make the stipulations of the new plan so much not to their benefit, but not to Russia's benefit, that Russia just kind of say no? Or do we go down this route of Russia say no, but how about this? And then Ukraine says no, but how about this? And you get somewhere close to the middle. Or will Russia just walk away and say, no, this doesn't solve the root problems like they keep talking about? And if they go down that route, then that is them walking away from peace. And they might do that because they feel they've got their tails up in Pokrovsk and in other places on the front line. I mean, for example, if we look at the map here, this is Pokrovsk as according to Andrew Perpetua's map. And you can see that he's now got grey zone right across the top, where he didn't just a few updates ago. So you had this supply route was still under the control of the Ukrainians. Obviously, there's going to be fire control and all sorts going on there. But you seem to have a grey zone right across the top now. Although it's interesting that because there have been Ukrainians spotted in the center of Pokrovsk, he's now put an area of the center of Pokrovsk as a grey zone where it wasn't previously. So I do wonder exactly what's going on here. But certainly the Russians haven't taken the whole of Pokrovsk like they keep claiming. They haven't taken Kupiansk, if we just have a look at Kupiansk, because I haven't done my mapping for a couple of weeks now. I just haven't had time, crazy times. But yeah, here we have essentially very little change. There is some change up here, but very little change. I'm going back now to this sector, certainly in the Kupiansk area itself. This is back on the 13th of November. And actually, you can see the Ukrainians taking some grey zone back off the Russians over the last week or so in this area, which I find interesting, but no real change to Kupiansk. So it doesn't look like the Russians have taken Kupiansk, but they've claimed they've taken Kupiansk. The big problem for the Ukrainians comes down in the south, in this area, where they are just advancing on, it seems, and putting Calliope under insane amounts of pressure. I mean, you can just see how quickly they have advanced. This is just the month of November. So that's 30th of October. You see Calliope there is somewhat safe from the Russians to the east there. But then just in, what are we, 25 days, we've had this. And it has been quick, to which, one commander, as I reported this morning, saying the Russians are making the quickest gains that he's seen them make during the beginning, since I guess the very early days of the war, and that's likely to be in this particular area. So that's your concern. Now, to take this back to what we were talking about, the Russians then might be thinking, okay, we've got a chance of taking some serious land, particularly in the south, where we seem to be, charging onwards. The Ukrainians are really thinly fielded across that front line, and if we're forced to make concessions now and have some kind of agreement, then we're not going to get as much land as we're going to get if we continue to do this. But of course, then also they're taking huge casualties, and their economy is looking more and more precarious. So there are all these calculations that Russia are going to be making. Ukraine the same. So for the Ukrainians, they've got a problem that they're going to lose land, in these frontline areas if they continue trying to rely on these defenses, kinetic defenses there, and they need to make a calculation as to whether that's worthwhile. But the problem is they've also got this situation where they're developing all these weapons, and they're actually getting quite a lot of weapons possibly coming online with help from, so Sweden's just paying for like 400 long range drones, I think, like Luti drones, and all these other things coming online, their own ballistic missiles and cruise missiles. And I'm thinking, goodness me, you know how screwed the Russian economy is right now? Well, in a couple of months' time, you saw what happened last night. Last night was a pretty good night for the Ukrainians. They've hit a wide range of things. And you're thinking, well, if they can continue doing that night after night, but then the Russians are doing that too to Ukraine's energy infrastructure. So basically, both of these sides are battering the crap out of each other, and that needs to be fed into their calculations as to whether they want that to stop now, or whether they want to stop in a month's time, 2 months' time, 6 months' time, or a year's time. Like, who does it benefit the most to have a ceasefire right now? And actually, that might not be immediately clear for either side anyway, because it's like, well, on the one hand, we're losing ground, like I say with Ukraine. On the one hand, we're losing ground. We don't want to lose any more men. But on the other hand, we got loads of cool weapons just coming on. Yeah, really, really interesting, trying to kind of war game this whole situation. Anyway, thank you for your comments there. Right, so we are now going to come on to Representative Don Bacon. Now, I heard this last night. I thought it was fascinating and not surprising. So just to let people know who Don Bacon is a Republican. He's in Nebraska, which is pretty swingy. He's potentially could go to the Democrats, and he is a Republican a congressman. He's a representative, so he's in the lower house, and they are up for election every 2 years. And he has said, I think partly because he just really disagrees with Trump on a bunch of things, but particularly, well, cost of living in Nebraska, but a lot to do with Ukraine. And so he said he's going to retire or resign in the next, November midterm elections next year, he's not going to run again. And that's first and foremost, it means he can run his mouth off because he's not really beholden to the Republican Party or the electorate anymore. So he can say what he likes. And actually, he's been condemning the crap out of Trump and Trump's approach to this peace plan, but also previously. He said, look, I wasn't a big fan of what Biden did to support Ukraine, but Trump's done even worse, right? So that's his position as a Republican. Now, he apparently was so appalled by the 28-point peace plan surrender document that, the dimwit document that Steve Witkoff had greenlit. He was so appalled by it that he would consider resigning. Of course, if he resigns, then there's a special election and you're likely to get a Democrat into his seat. And the Democrats are starting to say that they might not have to wait until November 2026. I mean, this is super important to understand what's going on here. The Democrats might not have to wait till November 2026 before they get control of the House. Mike Johnson then isn't the majority speaker. That becomes Hakeem Jeffries for the Democrats. So there's only a few special elections that would need to take place. And then suddenly, you've got a Tennessee special election. Now, Tennessee is a Republican plus 20 state, but that could be really interesting. Some people are saying there's an outside chance that the Democrats could take a district in Tennessee, and then that gives them another one closer to that majority if Don Bacon was to go. And this, to add to this, and this is really important, there was news that came out, I think I've got it in here actually, from, is it Punchbowl News, see if I can find this. It is well worth considering this, because apparently there are a number of Republicans who are now sounding off about how things are going and about how no, I don't have it here. Oh, damn it, that would be really good. Yeah, I don't have it, but apparently there are a bunch of Republicans who are really worried and saying essentially they're not being listened to, that the White House isn't treating them well at all, and there's really low morale and really low political motivation. You've had Marjorie Taylor Greene has just handed her notice in, and that's like thrown everyone, and nobody was expecting that. And she's had a go at Trump, and this gives a permission structure for other people to do the same and feel the same. And you might get to a point where the Republicans lose a majority in the House of Representatives before the November midterm elections, and that would be quite incredible because it's the lower house that gets to do investigations into Trump, and you can talk about impeachments, you can talk about Hakeem Jeffries then having the control over what bills get to be put to the floor, so on and so forth. Now let's have a look at Don Bacon here in interview on CNN, speak his mind again.
Are you confident that the president ultimately lands on Ukraine's side here? Because I noted over the weekend that the president was back to using some of the language he used in that notorious Oval Office meeting with Zelensky back in February, saying that Ukraine showing no gratitude for U.S. help. Again, talking about Ukraine having no cards in this. I just wonder where you think the president's going to land.
So the president's comments on Ukraine have been reprehensible. I know for a fact that Zelensky has said many times that he's been grateful. The people of Ukraine are grateful for our help, but he tends to blame Ukraine for Russia's invasion. I don't get it. And so I do not have confidence. The president has periodically said the right things, but more often than not seems to waver back into the Russian camp, the invader camp. That's why I think the House and the Senate need to take the lead here.
Yeah. I was just looking at Don Bacon. Somebody's saying that actually, no, Nebraska won't go to the Democrats. It's not Nebraska. It's about the district that he's in. And he's a centrist Republican. And there is a very strong chance that Democrats. So if you look at the over performance of the Democrats in recent elections, all the special elections, they've been overperforming sometimes by 20 points more than they're expecting, all sorts of different margins going on. And so there are a lot of people saying that in a special election in Nebraska, if he was to retire early in that district could well go to the Democrats. I don't know if someone can find out whether it's R plus. If it's anything below R plus 10 as a district, that's well in the sights of the Democrats, and so that's why it was freaking Republicans out when he is saying that he might retire early. Anyway, if you can do that for me as your homework in the side, that'd be great. Now, Bloomberg says the EU is preparing a new sanctions package against Russia's shadow tanker fleet. So they're putting together their 20th sanctions package, and that was going to look at those who keep the shadow tanker fleet running. The aim is to further cut Moscow's oil revenues that fuel the war. These measures are expected to be part of their 20th one. Now, the sooner they can put this together, the more effective that is going to be in terms of driving these discussions with Russia. It could bring Russia to the table. I mean, they are economically in a pretty weak position, the Russians, at the moment. And so, I really would appreciate a 20th sanctions package being put forward as soon as possible. Oh, what is D+3? That must be at the moment. So if it's D+3 at the moment, then yeah, that's a point, Tom. It will. Thanks, Chris J, for that. So yeah, I mean D+3 at the moment. That's going to Democrats. So yeah, that's why the Republicans are not wanting him to retire early. So there'll be loads of pressure being put on him. But apparently last night he was pretty close, because he has been sounding off about the peace negotiations being absolutely terrible. He is really critical of Trump's approach here. Well, it's not really Trump's approach. I think it's just a malaise within the White House, probably a Project 2025 thing. You've got JD Vance, he's a bad apple, and actually JD Vance's mate, who is Dan Driscoll, some people are saying is going to take over from Pete Hegseth. Some people are saying Pete Hegseth is going to go. Dan Driscoll could be one. Some people are saying Pam Bondi is going to go, and Sidney Powell could be taking over. Oh, that would be fascinating. But anyway, there could be some serious movements there in terms of these cabinet secretaries and whatnot. But Pete Hegseth might go, and it might be Dan Driscoll who takes over. So he's a JD Vance friend, and that is possibly a real worry. Actually, I think I preferred Pete Hegseth in there than Dan Driscoll, potentially. I don't know enough about Dan Driscoll, but I get a sense that he's part of the more isolationist wing of the party. I'm just going to adjust my camera a wee smidgen there. Okay, so thank you very much, by the way, to Karen Spanner. A bit of Canadian love there. Special election in Texas. So yeah, I mean, Texas is I mean, people are talking about, is it Cornyn up in 2026 in the November midterms, that if the Democrats have a good candidate, it looks like they do have, I think there'll be a primary there, but they've got a bunch of good candidates that can really make a bid for a Democrat senator in Texas, and that would be quite amazing. But anyway, it depends who the Republicans put up, because there's thoughts that if they put up, not Greg Abbott, the governor, who's the Attorney General, the guy that's scandalous, Attorney General Paxton. So if they put up Paxton, that he's so divisive that actually that would help to hand Texas to one of the Texas Senate seats to the Democrats. So, but yeah, a special election, says Karen again, special election in Texas on January the 31st, and it's guaranteed Democrat because 2 Democrats left after the runoff. I'm gonna have to look into that. Is that, Karen, if you just put in the comments, is that presently a Republican seat? Because 2 Democrats are left after. Right, okay. So there's been a runoff, and it's 2 Dems. How did I not know this? How did I not know this? Karen, that is brilliant. So wow, so that's another Democrat seat, but at the end of January. That's pretty incredible. I wasn't aware. There's a Guardian article on Dan Driscoll. I'll have to have a look into that. Look, yeah, it mentions JD Vance and Dan Driscoll there. So good stuff. Thanks, everyone. What a great team you are. Right, European Parliament has approved a 1.5 billion euro, that's $1.7 billion EU defence investment programme, EDIP, to boost Europe's defence industry and support Ukraine, Reuters reports. Now, I don't know the details of this, but this is yet another European mechanism, another EU mechanism to generate funds that would support Ukraine by supporting Europe's own defence industry. The plan running through 2027 requires, and that will be in line with the European defence strategy, 65% of defence components to come from the EU or partner countries. Partner countries would be countries at the moment like the UK, who has signed a few deals so that our defence industrial complex can access those kind of tenders, those contracts. But there are some discussions over the finer print of that detail, of that agreement. Right, Poland has demanded Belarus extradite the Ukrainians suspected of sabotage of their railways. 2 parts of the Polish railway that goes into Ukraine were blown up, or there were attempts to do so, and it was thought that a couple of Ukrainians were responsible on the behest of the Russians. These are pro-Russian Ukrainians, but you got to understand it's the Russians behind it. Poland summoned the Belarusian chargé d'affaires to the foreign ministry and handed them a note demanding the extradition of the 2 Ukrainians suspected of the sabotage there. What else do we know? Germany has recorded significantly more cases of Russian and Chinese military interference in outer space than previously known, according to Tagesschau. Now, again, like I've said to you many times before, this is war, isn't it? When does war become war? When does hybrid war become war in the sense that it triggers things like Article 5? And this appears to be this endless question that no one is prepared to answer with explicit detail. It's all a bit fuzzy. It's this grey area that lets you get away with not saying, right, that's it, we're at war with you now, because no one wants to admit that they're at war with Russia and China. But the end result here is that Russia and China get to then push the envelope further and further and further, and no one's got the guts to say we're at war, because no one wants to, obviously. So Russian satellites suddenly changes orbits to get a better view, in particular one of the Bundeswehr facilities where Ukrainians are being trained. So there's lots of aggressive activity taking place in space. Okay, the US is imposing new sanctions against several Russian IT companies and related individuals. So this is good from OFAC. This passed us by. This was like 19th, so almost a week ago. US Treasury Department's Office of Foreign Assets Control announced new sanctions against Russian companies and related individuals. Good news. I'm so frustrated that someone like Elon Musk is not doing more to deal with trolls and bots, and countries like, I mean, the United States should be sanctioning or should be regulating the crap out of Twitter. But of course, you know, it is to the advantage of the MAGA Republicans. They invariably have trolls and bot farms working on their behalf, and that's why they don't want to regulate against it. Meanwhile, the UK has smashed a Russian cybercrime network responsible for attacks on UK businesses, according to gov.uk. So this is the British government releasing some details here. The UK, US and Australia announced new sanctions targeting Medialand, a Russian cybercrime group providing so-called bulletproof hosting services. The Foreign Secretary announces latest crackdown on illicit cyber activity globally as cyber attacks cost the UK economy $14.7 billion in 2024. Today's coordinated action with Australia and the US demonstrates the UK's ongoing commitment to tackling malicious Russian cyber activity. Good news there. We have protests that have been taking place in the against the pro-Russian kleptocrat Robert Fico, who continues to rule Slovakia, and Slovakians, not all Slovakians are happy with that. They're not, these ones aren't interested in his attempts to sell the nation to Moscow. Good stuff there. So the Slovakians are coming out against the government there, at least some of them. Thanks F Oink for some Hungarian love. War by any other name still smells like a war. That's indeed correct, F Oink. And you know, I think we can bury our heads in the sand, but we definitely need acknowledging. And by acknowledging, I mean like in the public information spaces, or in our press. Every night we should be talking about what Russia is doing. Like, why is this not like front page news in UK newspapers. So when Nathan Gill, we're going to get onto Nathan Gill pretty much next, when Nathan Gill was arrested and when he was sentenced the other day, there are only two newspapers that featured it on their front page: the Daily Mirror, which is a left-wing tabloid, and the Guardian, which is a left-wing broadsheet, right? No other paper ran it on the front page because they're all complicit in Reform doing as well as possible. And woe betide any right-wing newspaper that reports on Nathan Gill getting sentenced to 10.5 years for taking Russian bribes. But all you have is the entire media scape in the UK, apart from a couple of papers that not as many people read, supporting Reform UK, and therefore by extension supporting Russian influence in British politics. We're going to come on to that in a second, but we're going to start our segue into that. It's going to be Russian influence in the AFD, which is kind of akin to Reform. So AFD is Reform German style, or Reform is AFD UK style. So the German AFD party in Ludwigslust, and I reported this the other day in one of my lives, but it fits here in the geopolitical one, has a Russian email address. You can't make that up. So literally on their web page for the AFD in one particular area of Germany, you have a Russian email address, mail.ru, for the contact for AFD. It's absolutely incredible. Nigel Farage's, well, not wife, but it's his partner, has links to Belgium's version of far right. Honestly, she's been investigated. I mean, the whole, goodness me, Farage should just be out of politics. He is a bad apple. But anyway, we're going to talk about it now. So, right, let's talk about Russian influence in UK politics again, because this is the gift that keeps on giving. This is Plaid Cymru MP. So Plaid Cymru is the Welsh nationalist. They're kind of a centre-left, I think, political party in Wales, a bit like SNP is in Scotland. As I've told you many times, our left electorate is split at least 4 ways in every area. You've got they're now centrist Labour, I'd say centre-left Labour, marginally centre-left Lib Dems, you've got Green populist left, and then you've got SNP in Scotland or Plaid Cymru in Wales. And that means they are completely split, and the right traditionally hasn't been split. So you have the Conservatives just romping through because everyone else's votes are split, and that happens every election. And Labour only get in if there's a landslide. Well, they got in this time because Reform came along and split the vote. And now we had the first election where the right wing had their vote split. So Reform and the Tories completely split. And then the question is, well, are they going to merge in some way to consolidate for the next election, or are they going to continue to split the vote? But at the moment, the Conservatives have been decimated and are basically non-existent. So it's going to be really fascinating to see what will happen for the next election. But anyway, this is a Welsh MP talking about Nathan Gill, where it's still big news in Wales, but it's just not being carried as much around the rest of the UK because the media landscape is owned by the right wing. Like I've told you before, I just mentioned the Guardian and the Mirror. Those don't have huge readership. On the right, you've got the Daily Mail, which has a phenomenal readership. You have the Daily Express, you've got the Daily Telegraph, you've got the Times, you've got the Spectator, you've got the Evening Standard, you've got the Sun, which has a huge readership. These are all either Murdoch or Rothermere or whatever. These are, your nefarious media entities controlling the narrative in the UK. And so Nathan Gill, 10.5 years, didn't feature on their front pages whatsoever, because they don't want to ruin Reform's chance of getting in. The election is already looking like the media is trying to rig it. So this is Sky News reporting here.
Well, of course, the traitor Nathan Gill was representing Wales in the European Parliament when he took this money from Oleg Voloshin. And he is therefore a traitor to the national interest of Wales, to the United Kingdom, and also to our allies in Ukraine. It calls now, of course, a question of how much wider this goes within what was UKIP, what was the Brexit Party, what was the Reform Party, all, of course, led by Nigel Farage. And I think if Mr. Farage is now serious, he should be committing to a full investigation. We know that Nathan Gill tried to persuade 2 other UKIP MEPs to speak on behalf of Oleg Voloshin, and indeed they did. They said things that were very similar to that which was said by Nathan Gill. This is an important time in the security, the national security of our politics. Nigel Farage must commit to a full investigation, and I would call on the new government, of course, this is not the same government as undertook the previous investigation into Russia interference. I think we now need another investigation at government level as well.
Absolutely, really well said there. Someone saying 10.5 years wasn't it wasn't long enough. I think it's who's popping. Actually, I think the judge took into account some other that he pleaded guilty. That was it. So he pleaded. The reason why it's 10.5 years wasn't because the judge was being weak, because so it was a lowball sentence, should have got a lot longer. Yeah, but I don't think he could because he pleaded guilty. So if you plead guilty, then it knocks off whatever, as far as I understand it, but that's what I was reading. Yeah, so that was well said, I think. And she was referring to conversations like this. So Nigel Farage, who said Gill was one bad apple, read this WhatsApp message with his handler Voloshin. The Crown Prosecution Service says that Gill attempted to involve at least 4 other UK politicians, including, quote, a leading figure in his party. So he wasn't just a bad apple, just on his own, you know, and randomly doing stuff over there. He was actually trying to involve other people, and you get this, you know, WhatsApp messages like this. So Gill saying somebody will not need rewarding. Voloshin, who's his handler, said, "I've asked Medvedchuk, get whoever it is, please, and Coburn as well. I will get 5 for you if you can get these 3 comments on camera. Or Arnott, we need 3. Okay, what time and where? They are to come to the European Parliament in roughly an hour. Okay, all 3 here." So he's literally getting, so it appears there are 3 other people involved from the party. WhatsApp messages between Nathan Gill and his handler, pro-Russian Ukrainian politician Oleg Voloshin. Name UKIP Brexit Party MEPs David Coburn and Jonathan Arnott as potential recruits to repeat Russian propaganda lines. There's no suggestion that either took the bribes, though. But remember, Nigel Farage at the time was saying exactly the same things as Gill in the European Parliament. And Gill was doing it because he took £40,000 from the Russians. Why was Farage saying exactly the same things? So today in Prime Minister's Questions, we had Starmer repeating what he said previously, but I like the fact that this hasn't been it hasn't evaporated into the ether, that they are still talking about this.
Can I join her in her comments about reform? Because it is shocking that a senior official, the leader in Wales, has been jailed for over 10 years, a very significant sentence, for pro-Russia bribes. That is extraordinary. And that is why I say, and I say again, there should be, that the reform leadership should have the courage to launch an investigation. How on earth did that happen in their party? And what other links are there? But today, this statement and the question across the House will reinforce once again that reform, with their pro-Putin approach, would have absolutely no role in bringing allies together on important issues across the globe. Mr. Speaker,
Now, the problem there, in my opinion, is he's asking Nigel Farage to self-investigate there, and that's never going to happen. Like, there should be a third-party investigation into Farage and into Russian politics and its Russian influence in UK politics. And this is why, yet again, I am going to implore any British person here to sign this petition. It's absolutely shot up. It's basically doubled since I shared it with you yesterday. A call for a public inquiry into Russian influence on UK politics and democracy. So you cannot sign this unless you're a British citizen. So if you're not British, don't worry about this. But if you can, please sign this. I would be deeply appreciative, because we need to make sure that we do not have any foreign involvement. I mean, goodness, we could do this for American involvement in UK politics. Now, I'm going to spend a little time talking about, I put it in a live chat, by the way, talking about Nigel Farage still. So an article came out in The Guardian just the other day, and something like this had previously come out. I reported on this 10 years ago, maybe, when they last reported some schoolmates talking about how racist he was at school. And now this is a good 45 years ago, mind, and we can talk about whether you are still responsible for things you said 45 years ago. If you said things as a child, as an adolescent, you know, is that a problem? People learn, but the question is, well, has he learned? Has he just actually remained the same kind of person? Like, if he was walking around singing Hitler songs, marching songs, and saying things like, he would sidle up to me and growl, "Hitler was right," or "gas them," sometimes adding a long hiss to simulate the sound of the gas showers. So the deeply shocking Nigel Farage faces fresh claims of racism and anti-Semitism at school. This has then got Reform scrabbling to try and counter this narrative, but this should be a really damaging article for and revelation for Farage. People like Daniel Hannan, who's a former Conservative Party member of European Parliament, who's a big fan of Farage, he's saying actually this will make Farage even more popular. You know, is that the world we live in, where you let the world know how overtly racist Farage was as a kid, and everyone goes, I like him even more now? Like, okay, well, that's the world for you. So let's just read a little bit to give you an understanding, because this is a big bit of news in the UK. For him, Farage's behaviour did stand out. He recalled a similar song being performed by Farage, who would also regularly perform the Nazi Sieg Heil salute, so the Roman salute, if you like. He claimed, quote, in the sixth form, you know, he became, so sixth form, for those who don't know, is when you're 17, 18. So this is, you know, not just an 11-year-old kid. In the sixth form, you know, he became much more kind of political and very right-wing, and shockingly so, he said, quote, we all kind of grew up in the shadow of the Second World War. Our grandparents fought in the Second World War. So, you know, you didn't question that Hitler was wrong. Somebody kind of outwardly doing Nazi salutes, strutting around the classroom, you know, doing kind of saying things like Hitler was right and all that stuff was pretty shocking, and therefore very memorable, France claimed. It was habitual, you know, it happened all the time. He would often be doing Nazi salutes and saying Sieg Heil and, you know, strutting around a classroom. He was a member of the cadet force, so often being in uniform. And yeah, it might have been for shock value partly, but I think, you know, clearly he was also very right-wing politically. He was saying really, really unpleasant things, really things you just knew were wrong. You can't really defend it as being a joke or that he was too young to know any better. We were 18. I was in the CCF Combined Cadet Force, and with him from 1979 to 1982 or so, said one former pupil, Farage did teach the young members of the CCF the infamous Gas 'em All song, or at least led the singing of it on CCF coaches to training areas, he claimed. The song, variants of which were heard in English football terraces in the 1980s, is sung to the tune of George Formby's Bless 'em All. One version runs, quote, gas 'em all, gas 'em all, gas 'em all, and into the showers they crawl. We'll gas all the N-word, and we'll gas all the Jews. Come on, you lads, gas them all. So this is what Nigel Farage was singing on the coaches to CCF training. The former people added, quote, there were black, Asian and Jewish CCF cadets on the bus. As I say, one of them asked me not to sing it or make those sorts of comments, and I didn't. I liked him. I was just being a bit silly. I suppose from a perspective, you could put it down to schoolboy racism, he said, but added that he believed that with Farage, a, quote, sort of divisive behavior seems to have persisted. Okay, so, you know, some people saying, oh, you know, your disgraceful attempt to besmirch Nigel Farage demonstrates a sheer panic among the liberal elite. Well, no, like, this needs to be known. Like, if this was Nigel Farage back then I think it's important that we know who he was at the age of 18. Imagine if Starmer or Badenoch, the leader of the Conservative Party, the following. Imagine that either Starmer or Badenoch were accused of blatant repetitive racism in the past by over 20 people, were linked via donors to their party of money laundering funding Russia, had a close colleague being imprisoned for Russian bribes, had questions about a Clacton house purchase that was unresolved. So the tax issue, that over an £850,000 house, that the money was paid for that by his missus, and no one knows where that money came from, and she's not got the money, and nor has her parents, even though they said the money came from the parents, and the investigation has shown that the parents don't have that money. So therefore, it looks like he's committed tax fraud. Were facing standards investigation for non-disclosure, as he is. He's facing multiple investigations. Were failing to deal with or ignoring current racism in their own party. So imagine that was happening with Keir Starmer. He would have been, all those newspapers would have kicked Keir Starmer out by now, because all those newspapers are protecting Nigel Farage. He gets that. He gets this immunity from, and he can do things with impunity. It is really disgusting, because actually there is Russian influence there, and if there isn't, we need to have that cleared. We need an investigation into this party and this person to show that there either is or isn't Russian influence. So, as Dave Lawrence says, they are all current issues for Farage today, and have been for weeks, instead of repetitive daily headlines in the media screaming for heads, relative silence from the complicit press. This is spot on. As for Farage himself, essentially silence since the farcical Tuesday 10 a.m. budget announcement, except, of course, for the safety of his own programme in GB News, where he is never questioned. So he gets a platform as well on GB News that he has shares in, and he has his own show on GB News, and he gets more amplification. Now, to be honest, Sky News have interviewed him and pushed him on this, and he said, as far as I remember, and it's difficult for me to remember, but I never said anything with racist intent. I think was the way he's phrased it. So he didn't intend to be racist. Oh, that's all right then. That's okay. That's fine. So, I think this is a problem. Now, we can then start connecting. So we've got Russian influence, we've got Nigel Farage, reform, populism, but then we can connect Nigel Farage to Epstein and the Epstein files. So the newly released Bannon-Epstein messages 2017 to 19 show that Epstein was having daily strategic advice, to Steve Bannon. So Steve Bannon was like the Steve Miller. Steve Miller is to Trump in 2.0 what Steve Bannon was to Trump in 1.0. And then he left the White House and went to Europe to start up a network situation where he was networking all the populist right-wing parties together, like AfD in Germany, Vox in Spain, and Reform in the UK. He's trying to network them together so there can be this victory for right-wing populism in the next decade, which actually is coming to fruition. So anyway, this was at this time Epstein was facilitating this. So he was giving strategic advice to Steve Bannon, while Steve Bannon and Nigel Farage were building a transatlantic far-right project. Epstein wasn't just a social acquaintance. He was in the room digitally for the construction of modern populism. Farage's partner, we've already mentioned her, Laure Ferrari, literally co-founded the Brussels organization, the movement that someone in the live streams already mentioned, which is a far-right Belgian organization that Bannon used to build a European nationalist network. Who helped shape the money structure and the logistics? Jeffrey Epstein. Epstein advised Bannon on how to avoid FARA disclosure, that's foreign influence in American politics, how to use 501c4 dark money nonprofits, how to shield political operatives with media shells, how to keep funding opaque, how to structure a European revolution without legal exposure. That's what Epstein did to help Steve Bannon and therefore Nigel Farage by extension. This was not small talk, it was political engineering. Bannon told Epstein he was working with, quote, Nigel, Boris and Rees-Mogg. That's Boris Johnson, the Prime Minister of the UK, and Jacob Rees-Mogg, one of the big head honchos of the Conservative Party. This is all Liz Webster, by the way, saying this. The guys are trying to move on May, today, tomorrow. So this is Epstein, or Bannon telling Epstein that Nigel, Boris, Rees-Mogg, they are moving on Theresa May. So this is when Theresa May lost the prime ministership, and when she came out, she gave that speech in front of Number 10 where she cried, and it was very emotional, and she was basically, attacked by these people, and then Boris Johnson became prime minister. This places Epstein inside the communications chain of the plot to topple Theresa May while Brexit was at its most volatile. Epstein also offered Steve Bannon the use of his island and homes for political strategy, arranged accommodation, flights and meetings, critiqued Bannon's media appearances, acted as a sounding board on Europe, Salvini, Le Pen's allies, and the Gilets jaunes. So you've got to understand what was going on in Europe at the time. You had Matteo Salvini, who's now presently the deputy in Italy, he is totally pro-Russian and anti-Ukraine. It's La Liga. His party is in coalition with the Brothers of Italy and Forza Italia. And Marine Le Pen is a French leader of Rassemblement National. So these are allies, and the Gilets jaunes were this movement of people who went in protest in France, but they were stirred up by pro-Russian like bots and trolls and right-wing populism and so on. So he was not Epstein was not a spectator. He was an influencer. In other words, Peter Mandelson, who has just been sacked as the British ambassador to Washington because of his connections to Epstein. He had embarrassing proximity, and Nigel Farage had political collaboration with Epstein through Bannon. So Farage wasn't merely around the Epstein orbit, he was inside a political machine Epstein helped shape. And look at the substance. Bannon called Farage the face of the European far-right project. Farage's partner built the Brussels shell. Farage brokered the meeting that handed it to Bannon, and Epstein provided the dark money blueprint. This is not gossip, this is architecture. Farage sells himself as a man who took on the elites, yet the newly revealed truth is far darker. His Brexit project was intertwined with Bannon, Epstein, US dark money network, Salvini, Le Pen's bloc, and the hardest edge of the global far right. Brexit was never anti-establishment, it was never grassroots, it was never patriotic. It was a transnational authoritarian project backed by billionaires, extremists, and a convicted sex offender with global influence. And Farage was right at the center of it. If Mandelson had emails showing Epstein advising him on political strategy, funding routes, and foreign influence operations, the country would erupt. Farage has exactly that, except worse, and because the stakes were Brexit and the reshaping of Europe, but nothing happens. Farage gets away with it because he has a press completely on his side. Like, we need to understand what is going on here. So honestly, this stuff is super, super, super important. And that's why I'm spending a lot of time talking about it. Now, to bring it back more discreetly to Russia, and again, this is Liz Webster, who does such a good job. This is the bit the UK establishment still pretends not to see. Nina Jankovic lays it out plainly. Farage's messaging overlaps Russian state narratives, and bot networks are amplifying it right into UK politics. And still no Russia report inquiry. That's what we've got this petition for, right? We need that. Still no protection, still wide open. So let's listen to a select committee hearing.
When we're looking at the UK, do you want to identify any British actors that you would say have been successfully captured by Russian misinformation?
I have certainly seen a lot of Russian rhetoric coming from Mr. Farage, and I don't think that's going to be a surprise to anyone in this room. And I would say his narratives about Ukraine converge also with the Trump administration's narratives. And there's also convergence on fighting disinformation. And I think we'll get to that a little bit later on, but just to kind of preview it, certainly Mr. Farage seems to be an important ally of the Trump administration's in tearing down counter disinformation programming, not only in the UK, but in the EU as well.
Wow. So there you go. Only a full inquiry can expose it, but that's not really happened yet. Add this to the newly released Bannon Epstein emails, where Farage appears in the very conversations about building a US-European far-right network, Russian amplification plus US far-right strategy plus domestic political vacuum. This is not a coincidence, it's a vulnerability. This is how Britain became the easiest country in Europe to manipulate. No investigations into 2016, into the Brexit vote, no checks on foreign funding, no regulation of political bot networks, no media scrutiny of Farage, a government terrified of the truth. We didn't move on. We left the door open. The real scandal isn't one politician. It's in the UK, even after Brexit. Cambridge Analytica and years of warning still has no national defence against hostile influence. If we don't fix this, the next election won't be decided by voters. It will be decided by networks, and democracy dies for good. Amen. That is absolutely on point. Now, there are some media sites that are doing really good work on this. One is the Byline Times. That's why I sign up to the Byline Times. They're Peter Jukes and Adam Bienkov and others are doing really good investigative journalism. And also Carol Cadwalladr and her new startup called The Nerve. I have approached her to see if I can interview her, but I need to get hold of her. I need to reliably get hold of her. But so if anyone knows how to do so, I'd love to interview her. She says the Nerve has the receipts, a comprehensive timeline of Nathan Gill and Nigel Farage's pro-Kremlin influencing activities and 2 other MPs, David Coburn and Jonathan Arnott. Please read and share. So actually done some really good investigative journalism to look in detail at the connections between these. In fact, she says here, there's no overstating how significant the Nathan Gill case is. On Friday, the ex-UKIP reform politician and close associate of Nigel Farage was jailed for over 10 years for taking multiple bribes via a handler from a friend of Putin. It's a complex, detail-heavy story. So I'm not going to go into the full lot here, but you've seen, that WhatsApp well, part of it. But as I said, you only had 2 newspapers showing it on the front page. Others were not showing it. So go and check out The Nerve on Twitter to see a full detailed analysis of their relationship. But it doesn't just stop there with Nigel Farage, and this is kind of talking about that far-right populist movement. Nigel Farage's Project 2029. So we know Project 2025 with the Heritage Foundation, that sweeping populist agenda that has been used as the blueprint for the Trump 2.0 rule. Well, actually, there's a pro-Trump lobbyist pushing his agenda into the UK. I've talked about this previously, a Trump-aligned anti-abortion lobbyist has hosted Farage's meeting with a January the 6th rioter, has been funding him, so funding Nigel Farage while pushing Project 2025's agenda in Britain. So there's this kind of importing, and I did a video on this, importing MAGA republicanism, basically Heritage Foundation Project 2025-ism, into the UK. There's a piece in The Guardian just the other day about, today, about reforms, Trumpian legal threats, hinting at more aggressive approach to media. So you've got Nigel Farage now threatening people who go against him with suing. So he's tried to sue a Welsh media outlet, and also had to go at The Guardian for printing that one, threaten them before they printed it on his childhood racism. But he's I think taking a leaf from Trump's book of like threatening to sue all the media that doesn't agree with him, except at the moment that doesn't really work in the UK, and he's not been able to particularly succeed there. But you can see that there is a real similarity between these 2 operators. Now, just to let you know, because I haven't even had a chance to look at the details of what is being talked about with regard to the budget announcements in the UK Parliament today, but we're screwed for money. And connecting all of these dots up, Brexit, this is out today, this, by the way, The Independent has a piece, I think from the Commons Library, they've taken this analysis from. The latest analysis shows that Brexit is now, and I know there's some of you still out there will be still in support of Brexit, and you know that I'm not, largely from the economic woes that were always going to come about. Well, there's another analysis that shows that it's costing us in tax revenue, not just in trade, in actual tax revenue, £90 billion a year. £90 billion a year. Now we're scrabbling around thinking we've got to put up taxes at the moment because we've run out of money. Then AI is going to absolutely clobber us as everyone's going to be losing their jobs because of AI, blah, 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 blah. Like all countries are going to be really up against it going forward. But we've got a double whammy in that we're suddenly £90 billion a year worse off than we were in 2016. This is a real issue. Anyway, I just thought I'd throw that one in there. Right. Okay. Now, this is nothing to do with anything today. I've literally dropped this in there because I'm a bit of a fanatic for renewables. I love them, always have. I find them interesting, really interesting. Britain has set a new record for wind-powered electricity. National Energy System Operator has predicted Britain could hit another milestone in the months ahead by running the grid for a period entirely with zero carbon power. That's renewables and nuclear. Wow. A new wind record has been set for Britain with enough electricity generated from turbines to power 22 million homes, the system operator said. So we've had records. So at that time, wind was providing 43.6% of Britain's electricity, enough to keep around 3/4 of Britain's homes powered. Obviously, you know, it's a bit variable wind. So it's all about having it in a mix and then having reactive load that can up and down to that. But I think that's really good. And the great thing about renewables isn't just about the environmental situation, but actually it's about energy security. Like, we don't have to depend on other people for coal and for oil and for gas. You know, and we can produce our own gas, extract our own gas and oil, and then we can sell that to other people. If the more reliant you are on renewables, honestly, it is not only is it becoming cheaper and cheaper, and this is the idiocy of Trump is, like, at a time when you've got data centers that are so energy hungry, you need to produce much more energy, and he's like shut down an 80% completed Rhode Island, I think it was Rhode Island, wind project. 20% away from being completed. He shut it down because he's being lobbied by fossil fuels. He shut down a solar farm that's just about to be completed. And it's like, do you know how much you need energy? Like, that scarcity of energy is going to push prices up, energy inflation, which is going to be completely inflationary and against what you want. But because you're so beholden to the fossil fuel industry, because remember in the lead up to the election, he said, if the fossil fuel want to come and give me $1 million and sit down with me for a meal, then I'll give you the policies that you want, or whatever it was. And they did that. And so he's given them the policies and he's quid pro quoing it. Whereas you give me money, I'm now going to just shut down solar farms and wind farms. Meanwhile, the rest of the world is not doing that. And actually, if you look at the Ember report on energy, it's fascinating that renewables are absolutely blowing people out of the water in terms of they really exceeded predictions. Solar in places like in Africa and elsewhere around the world, and even in Eastern Europe, solar in places like Poland is doing really well at the moment, largely due to residential people putting solar panels on their houses. I've got solar panels on my house. It's just something I've always felt really strongly about. And anyway, this is interesting, and I think understanding all of this. Sorry, I wasn't even showing you this. This is a Sky News piece. Goodness me, all that time I was ranting. So this is absolutely fascinating, but also really interesting, and it is linked to Russia, because as we understand the delicate balance of energy needs around the world, we are wanting Russia not to be dictating prices and inflation and supply and demand. I think it's in everyone's best interest to be energy independent, to be energy secure and energy independent. And to be honest, I've watched a whole bunch of analyses on this on YouTube. I'm a little bit obsessed with this, but renewables are one of the best ways to get energy security and independence. It's just there are so many advantages that it's not about environmentalism often. Although that is obviously a benefit, but there are so many other benefits as well. Now, again, so there is a method to my madness. So we're going from populism through, I just mentioning energy, Brexit and energy, and then we're going on to Venezuela. So where's the connection there? Well, you'll see this in a second. The Trump administration, according to CNN, could have expanded authority to take action against Venezuela starting on Monday, as the US designates Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro and his government allies as members of a foreign terrorist organization. Okay, wow. So if he's a member of a foreign terrorist organization, I presume that means he can kill him. Get a load of this. So this is a Republican, is it Congresswoman Salazar? She's answering a question on, why Venezuela, what's going on here. Her answer is incredible.
That the airspace above Venezuela has been closed off and the commercial airlines from the United States are not flying. He's understanding that we're about to go in. He understands that he has been our enemy for the last 25 years. Mm-hmm. Venezuela, for those Americans who do not understand why we need to go in, for three reasons. You're in Fox Business. Venezuela, for the American oil companies, will be a field day. because it will be more than $1 trillion in economic activity. American companies can go in and fix all the oil pipe, the whole oil rigs, and everything that has to do with the Venezuelan petroleum companies, or everything that has to do with oil and the derivatives.
Let's just go through that again. Let's listen to the number one reason that she gave for a potential invasion of Venezuela. She's saying the quiet part out loud. This is Iraq war, weapons of mass destruction, but actually going in because Iraq's got oil. Now they're just saying it up front. They're saying, oh yeah, we're going to go in, we're going to invade Venezuela, and we've been blowing up their boats illegally, but who cares, because we're going to go and get a whole bunch of oil.
5 years. Venezuela, for those Americans who do not understand, understands that he has been our enemy for the last 25 years. Venezuela, for those Americans who do not understand why we need to go in, basically for three reasons. You're in Fox Business.
Number one reason.
Venezuela, for the American oil companies, will be a field day, because it will be.
Number one reason, Venezuela for the American oil companies will be a field day. And that's it. We're invading Venezuela. I mean, this is what people used to do in times of empire, but I thought we'd move past that to be, in an era of trade, and we do our fighting through trade and through trade alliances. But no, Russia has taught us that we are still living in an age of empires. As absolutely incredible. Honestly, it's absolutely incredible that she said that out loud. Just amazing. And then now we're going to get onto a little bit on Trump just quickly. Wow. So this is true. This happened. And we're just going to listen to Donald Trump in a second. It's incredible. So if you remember, Jair Bolsonaro was the Brazilian autocratic wannabe leader who was elected. Then the country lurched to the right. He was very much your Viktor Orban style of leader. And then he was voted out and then tried to hang on and do a January the 6th. And it was at the Supreme Court was attacked by his supporters. It was all very January the 6th. Anyway, he's a good friend of Trump, and he was arrested for all that, and we hear this. Holy doo-doo. Rachel Maddow is reporting that former Brazilian President, Jair Bolsonaro, who is about to begin a 27-year prison sentence for doing what Trump did, attempting to overthrow his country's democracy, tried to remove his ankle monitor with a soldering iron and flee to the US with Trump's help. I'll say it again. With Trump's effing help. Trump was plotting with him on Saturday, and Bolsonaro was arrested early Sunday morning. On Monday, Trump was asked about Bolsonaro, and Trump said he was expecting to see him very soon. When reporters told Trump that Bolsonaro had been arrested, Trump appeared shocked and disappointed. And this is indeed true. So, my goodness. So literally, Bolsonaro was trying to take his ankle bracelet off, apparently to flee the country, to get to America so that he could plot with Trump. And this is Trump responding to questions about this.
Do you have any comment about Bolsonaro's arrest? A former Brazilian president. So I spoke last night to the gentleman you just referred to, and we're going to be meeting, I believe, in the very near future.
So this is just so delightful. He's like, the guy you're talking to, we're going to be meeting in a very near future. I was on the phone to him last night, when he had an ankle bracelet on, and we're going to meet in a very near future. The only way that can happen is if the ankle bracelet comes off, right? And he flees the country to the US. Like, literally, it is impossible to happen unless you are going to facilitate or condone Bolsonaro illegally leaving the country to come to meet you. That's the only way that happens. So therefore, Trump is complicit in the breaking of Brazilian law, or was looking at being complicit, until, of course, he couldn't get the ankle bracelet off, and he was arrested and then I think taken away to jail so that he can't do that again. So Trump is then told by the reporters, you do realize he's just been arrested.
Sir, are you worried about the president being arrested today? What? Any comment about the court?
I love that. Before he says what, it's a genuine surprise here. I love it.
About the president being arrested today. What? Any comment about the former Brazilian president being arrested today? No, I don't know anything about it. I haven't heard. Mr. President, are you willing? I didn't hear. Is that what happened? Yes, there's a citation. That's too bad. That's too bad. No, I just think it's too bad.
So he didn't know anything about that. Pretty incredible. Right, just a little bit on the United States now. And we're going to start with just going to talk very quickly about, we've got a quote here from Mark Biscuit. Now I'm wondering if Putin agreed to help Trump in Venezuela, if Trump helps him in Ukraine. This is an interesting question or comment, Mark, because we know that there are Russian military personnel training Venezuelan armed forces up, and if the US is going to attack Venezuela, then they're going to attack a nation that has a whole load of Soviet and Russian weaponry, as they've been close friends, and they continue to be trained by the Russians. So Trump really should understand that the Russians are the enemy here, but he doesn't quite get that, and the Russians are helping the US's enemy in war, in a war that might just be about to kick off. And yeah, I don't know. So I'm wondering if Putin agreed to help Trump in Venezuela if Trump helps him in Ukraine. That would be a proper humdinger. Yeah, I'm no evidence of that, but you can imagine that will make a pretty mental movie, wouldn't it? Right, so what we're going to do, just really quickly, I want you to understand the craziness of American politics at the moment. So I'm not going to play you all the bits where Trump has said this in public. Actually, Seth Meyers just did a really good piece on this on his closer look part of his late night with Seth Meyers, where he played all the bits where Donald Trump had called Mamdani the new well, he's elect at the moment. He's just about to become the mayor of New York. He's called him a jihadist, a communist, a left-wing radical, a this, a that, like absolutely excoriated Mamdani. And then they met in the White House, and it was just all hugs and kisses. It was incredible.
President Trump, Stephen Nelson from the New York Post. I've got a question for you, and then also one for Mayor-elect.
Sure.
For you, you referred to Mr. Mamdani as a communist. Can you describe why you feel that way? And also, will you do anything to stop him from arresting Prime Minister Netanyahu if he visits New York?
Well, we didn't discuss your second part of the question. And on your first part, I mean, he's got views that are a little out there, but who knows? I mean, we're going to see what works, or he's going to change also. We all change. I changed a lot from when I first came to office. It's now quite a while ago. It's quite a while. My first term was great. We had the greatest economy in the history of our country. We're doing even better now. We're doing much better now than we did even the first term. And I can tell you some of my views have changed. And we had discussions on some things. I'm not going to discuss what they were, but that I feel very confident that he can do a very good job. I think he's going to be, I think he is going to surprise some conservative people, actually. And some very liberal people, he won't surprise them because they already like him.
So honestly, and this is just a small excerpt, he goes on to say, we actually agree with on a load of different things. You'd be amazed that we agree on loads, and so on and so forth. And he basically spends this time like kissing up to Mamdani. It's just absolutely extraordinary. And then someone asked whether Mamdani still thinks that Trump's a fascist, and Trump like strokes him on the arm and says, "It's okay. You can tell him what you want. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter." And he said, and so Mamdani goes, "Yeah, I do." And they're all laughing about it. And you've got this weird situation where, like, a couple of days before, he's calling me a jihadist communist who he's going to send troops into New York to go in, and he's going to defund the whole of New York. Then he's asked about whether he's going to defund New York. He says, "No, I'm not," and blah blah blah. And then, so what? It's all performative. It's all so performative. But also, I just wonder how much is of what Trump says on Truth Social is written by other people. When Trump actually meets people, Trump didn't really believe half the stuff he said before, or stuff he's told to say. Oh, just please remember to call this guy a jihadist communist and blah blah blah. I do wonder how much of Trump is puppeteering. Timothy Snyder says, I think Trump understands Mamdani is not someone he wants to tangle with. Too smart, too charismatic, too New York, too straightforward, too young. Easier targets elsewhere, like everyone who works for him and most of Congress. And Trump likely sees in Mamdani what he always wanted to be himself, to go from being a Queens outsider to a Manhattan insider. So these are both people from New York. It's just quite extraordinary that he's turned and given this olive branch to Mamdani, and they seem to be best of mates. Meanwhile, Marjorie Taylor Greene has come out. I'm not going to play you this, but honestly, go and listen. 10 minutes 42 of Marjorie Taylor Greene going to town on the political system, on feeling threatened. So loads of people are asking, well, why is Marjorie Taylor Greene just basically resigned? And people close to her are saying that actually she is genuinely this isn't that she wants to be president, wants to be governor, wants to be senator, wants to do this is actually, no, she's had enough. She was, the threats to her children, that actually she didn't want anything to do with it anymore. And I can kind of see that. Pod Save America did a good analysis on what they believe are her motivations, and I actually think that she probably is like fed up and feels betrayed, and is also recognizes that Trump doesn't give one shit about the average American person, and that when it comes to things like the big beautiful bill, he doesn't care, and people's healthcare premiums will go up, and that affects people in her family. I think she's probably had a bit of a moment of realization. She now fully understands like the media landscape and the political landscape, and she's had MAGA people turn against her. She's had MAGA people support her. She will be primaried by Trump. He will be pumping loads of money into her not winning, and if she scrapes through, then she's like, well, what power do I have? Because blah blah blah. Actually, you could argue she'd have maybe more power than she's ever had. But anyway, as a congressperson, generally, I mean, she's not done an awful lot in terms of bills anyway. The discharge petition, I think, will be her one single bit of legislation that she can actually stand up and say, look, I had a lot to do with that. But even then, she didn't author it. So yeah, it's just fascinating that Mamdani is brought into Trump's orbit and Marjorie Taylor Greene is kind of thrown out. And here's what I was saying. This is from Punchbowl News. This is what I was looking for earlier when I was talking about Don Bacon, the Nebraska Republican. Quote, this is from Punchbowl News. Quote, this is not from Marjorie Taylor Greene. These are people that are being contacted, other Republican lawmakers. This entire White House team has treated all members, as in representatives, like garbage. More explosive early resignations are coming. It's a tinderbox. Morale has never been lower. Mike Johnson will be stripped of his gavel and they will lose a majority before this term is out. So in Punchbowl News, they're interviewing Republicans who are saying, there are going to be people resigning, that actually Hakeem Jeffries and the Democrats will take over the majority rule in the House of Representatives before the November midterm elections. And that changes everything. And that changes arguably what goes on with Ukraine. Suddenly Ukraine might be back on the agenda, and American support built up from the House of Representatives upwards. Just really, really fascinating. Honestly, what's going on with American politics in the moment is fascinating. Now, the other weird thing is that Trump's polls at the moment are the worst they've ever been. He's got terrible polls, but particularly amongst Democrats and independents and swing voters and non-registered voters and so on and so forth. But when it comes to Republicans in the party, he's weirdly got a higher approval than Bush and Obama had from their own party when they were at the same point in their second term. So there still is a cultish, feverish support for Donald Trump, even though he's just making insane policy decisions. So that there is that to consider. Right. Typically, Trump shared this the other day. None shall escape his justice. And there are two things to note here. What does Trump have on his head? A crown. So again, it's this idea that he wants or sees himself as a king. But I don't know if anyone noticed what's at the top of this. Does anyone notice what's at the top of his throne? where he has people on their knees in front of him. Chuck Schumer, that I suppose that's supposed to be Elizabeth Warren, and that is that old Adam Schiff, I think. Look what's at the top of his throne. As other people have pointed out, it looks rather similar to, I don't know, to other symbolism, as one of you has already pointed out. Please feed me poop. It is indeed a Nazi eagle. This eagle there looks very conspicuously similar to that eagle there. So just quite incredible stuff. Anyway, talking about swastikas, though, in case anyone had any doubts which direction the US is going in, the US Coast Guard will no longer classify swastikas and nooses as hate symbols. The military service, which falls under the Department of Homeland Security, has drafted a new policy that classifies such items as potentially divisive, but not indeed hate symbols. So that's a direction of travel over there. And another thing that may have passed people by, the UN had a vote, item 71A, draft resolution AC380 blah 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 blah, on torture and other cruel, inhuman or degrading treatment or punishment. Who are the three nations that voted against it? So who thinks it is okay to torture? Argentina, Israel, and the United States. Abstentions: Russian Federation, Papua New Guinea, Nicaragua, and Burundi. What is the United States doing at the moment in the UN? Like, what is going on? We're living in an upside down world. Anyway, it's cool now to torture, I guess. So there you go. Right. What else? We've heard Trump do this time and time again. There's a 4-minute montage here. I'm just going to play you 30 seconds of Trump berating women, female reporters, only female reporters, really. Generally, it's female reporters.
Will you let me finish my sentence? You are the worst. You're with Bloomberg, right? You are the worst. I don't know why they even have you.
Quiet, Piggy.
You say that, darling. That's fake news.
Well, why
I
leave
don't
the
go to
Department
war.
of Defense?
Listen, be quiet. Listen. You don't listen. You never listen. That's why you're second grade.
What he did, well, you don't know much about crypto. You know nothing about nothing. You're fake news. Let me
Do it now.
You know, it's not the question that I mind. It's your attitude. I think you are a terrible reporter. It's the way you ask these questions. You start off with a man who's highly respected, asking him a horrible, insubordinate, and just a terrible question. And you could even ask that same exact question nicely.
Anyway, there's 4 minutes of that, and it is quite incredible to watch that kind of behavior from the president of the United States. He doesn't like women, I don't think, in positions of holding him accountable and accountable to, whether he tells the truth or not. And indeed, talk about telling the truth. My goodness me. So let's have a very short bit on economics. CNBC here reporting, my understanding is the White House said that China was going to buy 12 million tons of soybeans. So you remember when China, because of the trade war with the US, then stopped buying soybeans, started buying them from Argentina. The US bailed out Argentina to the tune of $40 billion, which actually supported the Argentinian soybean farmers who were then supplying soybeans to China. And then you had this meeting between the Chinese and the Americans, and Trump came out and heralded this situation where, the Chinese are going to buy soybeans again. And he promised that they were going to buy 12 million tons of soybeans, which is less than they were previously. So it's still a net loss. But he said, hey, look how amazing I am. And then it turns out that they haven't done that, because yet again, the promises that Trump keeps. So he said that he's going to get $20 trillion of investment from outside the nation into the US. And the problem is, these are all just people sitting down with him going, I'm going to give you that. Do you want the moon on a stick? I'll give you the moon on a stick. And I've got a herd of unicorns. You want a herd of unicorns? I'm going to give you a herd of unicorns. So people just promise him crazy things, and he goes, oh, brilliant, I believe that. And then he goes back to the media and says, I'm going to get a herd of unicorns. We're going to get some unicorns. Woo, unicorns. And then he keeps mentioning it did I tell you unicorns? Have I told you unicorns? Anyway, unicorns. And the reality is evidently very different. So as CNBC here says, my understanding is the White House said that China was going to buy 12 million tons of soybeans from the US by January. and that's not approaching. Sorry, that's approaching, and they've only purchased 332,000. China has not confirmed that pledge. Brooke Rollings, then, who is the agriculture
and tell me if I'm
secretary.
wrong. My understanding is that you said in the White House, it said that China was going to buy 12 million metric tons of soybeans from the United States by January. We're now just about a month and a half away from that. They have, according to the USDA report, only made 2 big purchases, and they total in total 332,000 metric tons. How is that pledge, if that is a real pledge, and China has not confirmed that pledge, going to be made in that quick a time?
Andrew, thank you. We're actually about 1.5 million metric tons, but your point is still salient, right? That 1.5 million of 12 million, we've got a significant way to go. I know they are inking the deal this week or next week. Again, every sign is their commitment remains true, that they will indeed buy or purchase 12 million metric tons or put the order in. It doesn't mean we'll move 12 million metric tons by the end of December, but it means that those orders will come in according to their commitment and their promise to our president and to Secretary Bessent and to Ambassador Greer. So again, we have every indication that those will continue.
In other words, it'll happen. I promise it'll happen. Trust me, bro. Trust me, bro. Now, the US has cancelled the third quarter advance estimate GDP reports. This is on the back of cancelling jobs reports and the inflation reports. And because the government shut down and so on and so forth. So the jobs report got cancelled. Inflation report was cancelled. And now the GDP reports. Sure, it's all a coincidence, says this guy. Everything is fine. Why do you think they would be cancelling these reports? I would have thought if they were good reports, they'd be scrabbling to get that information out. This is all bad news, bad economic news, I think, for the United States at the moment, for Donald Trump in particular. And so you can imagine that lots of what Trump does and says is in the context of trying to distract people away from the bad news. So there are 2 aspects of really bad news at the moment. Economic, I think, news is not great for Trump. And then you get the Epstein files. And this was an extraordinary exchange after the release of some of those emails the other day.
I'm going to be honest with you guys. I actually went through the files this weekend in depth. Donald Trump is not only named over and over in them, it is discussed this trial in which he was accused of raping a 13-year-old at Epstein's house.
That is Donald Trump accused.
There is extensive discussions about a subpoena of Donald Trump in one of Jeffrey Epstein's cases in which he was accused for rape and sexual abuse. He was subpoenaed and gave a deposition in that case. There is extensive discussion between Donald Trump, Ghislaine Maxwell, and Mr. Wolf about not only Trump coming to his house, but Epstein says in these emails that he has photographs of Trump with girls. I'm going to be honest with you guys. I actually went.
So that is someone from the Oversight Committee saying what for, really. And that's some pretty incredible revelations coming out there. I mean, that accusation was known about before, by the way. I know some of you are saying, what, that really happened? So go and have a look into it. Right. Well, Trump is pulling. Oh, yeah. So there's going to be distraction away from all of these things. But there's also just other indications that just the whole thing is either performative or it's just so ill thought through. So one example is Doge. Doge is now being formally cancelled because it's costing too much. It's like the attempt to save money is now costing too much, and Doge only remember that Elon Musk said he was going to get $2 trillion of savings and he got 2 billion. I mean, the difference between 2 trillion and 2 billion is absolutely phenomenal. So there you go. Then we hear that Trump is pulling the National Guard troops out of Chicago and Portland after accomplishing basically nothing other than revealing their incompetence and cruelty. Of the 607 people detained in Chicago, just 17 had a criminal record. The National Guard troops did, however, manage to disrupt a Girl Scout hunger drive, tear gas onlookers and police officers, and brutalize clergy. What a catastrophe. Performative. And then there's this. I don't know if you remember, I did report on this in one of my videos, but was it in Chicago? They had the kind of Black Hawk helicopter over one of these buildings, and they rappelled down the side of the buildings. They went in, cleared everyone out of buildings, and arrested like as many people with brown skin as they could get to try and this was like an ICE raid on a building, right? And then, but they also had loads of people with like 4K HD cameras there. So the idea was this was performative for film. Now it turns out, remember the Chicago apartment raid with Black Hawk helicopters that was in a building, quote, filled with trained day irregular terrorists. Actually, so it's about Venezuela, it's supposedly Venezuelan terrorists, according to Stephen Miller. ProPublica's reporting that not a single person who was arrested has been charged with a crime. All of that, the amount of money, the amount of effort, Black Hawk helicopters, people rappelling down the sides of a building in the middle of Chicago, and not a single person that they took there has been arrested. Absolutely bonkers. And then we hear that the CDC has updated its vaccine safety page on the American government website to promote long discredited claims about vaccines, namely that they cause autism. So the page links to a number of studies, including one by anti-vax allies of Robert Kennedy Jr. So now you just got, oh my goodness, all of this just it's either performative or it's anti-scientific or it's just absolutely bonkers. Anyway, the very last thing I am going to say before coming back to you guys. Mitchell Bailey, JP, love you, but that's one big difference. DHS is doing everything you said. I'm not sure I understand you from that comment, so you might need to, if you could just elucidate a little bit. Right, Nick Stanton put this comment, and I meant to discuss this like weeks ago. So this was, I don't know how long ago, 11 days ago. I meant to discuss this then. So sorry, Nick, if you're watching this. I don't know, you're probably not. But anyway, Jonathan, since when has politics been about moral calculations? So I often talk about moral calculations. And since when have politicians acted in a moral way? Politics is about staying in power or gaining power. I don't like Trump any more than you do, but he knows he has to maintain his MAGA base. One of his campaign promises was no more foreign wars. So we as supporters of Ukraine have to live with that. Whilst he was withdrawn direct funding of the war, he has maintained a flow of intelligence to Ukraine, allowed arms sales to European international supporters of Ukraine to be sold on or gifted to Ukraine, imposed sanctions on Russia, reinforced the US commitment to NATO, and allowed some key decisions to be made by SACEUR, probably heavily influenced the drop of hydrocarbon prices, which may end up forcing Russia's hand. As far as I'm aware, he's not actually withdrawn US troops from Europe. I stand to be corrected on that. I think it's completely unrealistic to expect any US president in the modern era to go wholeheartedly into a European war unless their interests are really threatened. I would argue they are. After all, they were 3 years late into World War I and 3 years late into World War II in terms of boots on the ground. Furthermore, the UK was bankrupted by World War II and the Americans did very nicely economically. Thank you. So I just wanted to, I mean, loads of interesting talking points, and it's about, stopping all these things and actually just positioning themselves as pro-Russian. That's the problem I have. But we could make a case that actually Trump is doing sensible things for the United States in terms of not spending as much money on Ukraine and making sure people buy stuff. But it's when you send Steve Witkoff to meet with Kirill Dmitriev and you come up with a 28-point peace plan that looks identical to what the Russians want, and it appears to be a Google Translate of the Russian wish list, then that's when I get angry. Right? That is not good enough. And Trump just defaults to being pro-Russian at every conceivable opportunity. And that's what I have an issue with. But what I really wanted to talk about is the first sentence, which I just massively disagree with. Since when has politics been about moral calculation? Politics is literally a subset of morality. So politics is always a moral calculation. It just is by default. So this makes no sense. I just want to do a bit of philosophy here. So there are three forms of moral philosophy. There's descriptive philosophy, descriptive ethics, which is describing how people act. It's like saying, well, 72% of people here do this and 28% of people do that in terms of some kind of moral behavior, right? That's you're describing moral behavior. So that's descriptive ethics. Normative ethics is what people should do. It's like a prescriptive. You have descriptive and prescriptive. Like, this is the moral framework that I believe I adhere to, moral consequentialism or virtue ethics or, desirism or whatever it is. You come up with these different, deontology, categorical categorical imperatives, right? And that is your normative ethics, which is how people should act in your opinion, as according to your framework. And then the third area is called meta ethics, which is what do the words right and wrong actually mean? And is looking at in a meta sense at those kind of terms and the understanding of these concepts. But it's a middle one, normative ethics, that is what most people understand as morality, which is, what's your moral framework and how do you think the world should operate? And that's what politics is. Politics is like, what should we do as a country? As soon as you talk about oughts, they are moral oughts. Like, you ought to do this. We ought to have a lower tax burden. We ought to send our troops into Ukraine. We ought to support Ukraine. We ought to have a better welfare system. We ought to have universal healthcare. Those are all moral proclamations. But when we normally talk about morality, we talk about on an individual level. Politics is just morality on an individual level, writ large onto society. Politics is morality, right? It's a subset of morality, I would argue. And so therefore, since when has politics been about moral calculation? It is all the time. And since when have politicians acted in a moral way? They do all the time. Don't be so down on politicians. I know politicians that have gone into politics because they want to change people's lives for the better. Like, we can't always think that politicians are just all evil sods that just don't have an interest in society and in people. Like, that's a really cynical view of reality. And like, I can argue that in terms of Donald Trump, right? But even with him and Stephen Miller, there's a sense that the US should look like everyone has white skin, right? I'd argue vehemently against that, right? But that is their moral positioning, or at least Stephen Miller's. And so even when we look at some of their moral calculations and say, well, that's not a moral calculation, that's no, that there are moral calculations going on there. We just disagree with the inputs that they use to get the outputs, garbage in, garbage out. Now, there is another element to politics, which is how do you get into power? And this is where you have to start like compromising. So Labour, for example, in the UK would have said, right, we need to get into power because by doing this, we're going to have the Ming-Va strategy where we're not going to say anything big either way. And hopefully these guys will argue and cut each other up and then we'll waltz into power. And that's kind of how they did it. And then they're like, oh, if we want to stay in power, do we appease the far right by having really hard stances on immigration, or but then we lose the left. So do we appease the left? And how do you stay in power and how do you get into power is sometimes more about practicalities and compromising your core values so that you can get into power and hopefully then return to your core values, right? So there is an element of politics that is, in a sense, like dismissing morality in favor of a kind of fake sense of your morality, a fake political agenda that would just facilitate you getting into power or maintaining power. And the problem is when there are some countries like, for example, Viktor Orban's Hungary and the Fidesz party that get into power and they have their core political platform and agenda and manifesto and whatever, but then 10 years, 15 years later, power has corrupted them and it becomes about power and money. And that is when you are moving away from democracy and not trying to appeal to people's democratic desires, but you are just doing things to line your own pockets. And that is when politics moves to being about staying in power or gaining power. But that is almost always moving away from democracy. So anyway, there's some nuance to be had there. I just thought I'd fancy a little bit of a discussion on that stuff. And I don't know if any of you are still listening to me banging on. Probably not. Right. Okay. So I've been talking to you for too long. My partner's back from work. I'm going to be in trouble. Let's see if you have. Thank you so much, by the way, everyone who has contributed. Thanks to Johnny Nedregard. Some love from Norway there. As mentioned, Karen as well from Canada. and again, appreciate that. We talked about that. Thanks to F Oink from Hungary. Thanks to Michael Vujar from Canada, gifting 5 ATP Geopolitics memberships. Thank you. And Zeb Carter as well. You two work in unison so often. Thank you. And Kevin Forst when he's here. So thank you to you guys. Super, super kind. Thanks to Mark Bisque, always so generous. Thank you, Mark and Olena. Really, really appreciate you. And ex-Penguin 95, Eagle, not Nazi, within 40K law, the Aquila represents loyalty to the emperor. So his message that he wants total personal loyalty is not subliminal. Now, do you know what? Good point there. And so what ex-Penguin's talking about, in case anyone knows what 40K is, this is Warhammer 40K, which is the futuristic version of Warhammer, which is like fancy figurine game. But the 40K is with Space Marines and whatnot. And it's true, actually, the Eagle. So if someone has said, I want Trump to be an emperor sitting at a throne, then AI could have generated that and put an eagle there by looking at that kind of law, not just from, say, Warhammer 40K, but actually from sort of Roman empirical Roman Empire times and whatnot. So yeah, I will definitely concede that point. But it, fair cop gov. But thanks for that, X. Really, that sounds like you're my ex. You're not really. Why are you? A pirate. My help for today. Thanks, mate. Let's get to 100,000 subs and a little whiskey shop fund for JP. Thanks, mate. Do you know what? I had some white port last night from Little Whiskey Shop. And do you know what? I had a couple of glasses of wine with my partner and a white port to end off the day. I don't think I slept well enough last night, and I've got a headache now. But it's probably also because I haven't had enough cups of tea. So anyway, yeah, please do like, subscribe, and share. Really, really appreciate you guys. Thanks for those of you who hang out at Discord. Please do that. Go and hang out with each other and talk more. Thank you so much for being here and for having a cordial chat. It is always appreciated. Sorry if I haven't been able to get to many of your comments. Last comment here, Greg Scarrett. This is my long goodbye. Greg, says Greg. JP, how can it be considered moral for politicians being able to constantly vote to give themselves pay rises to the point where they are material incompatible with the people they're supposed to represent? I mean, this is a very particular case, but yeah, I'd agree. But it doesn't mean they aren't also making moral decisions. So when they're talking about what healthcare provision they're voting on and what policy, that, I mean, that's moral, but they can also vote in their own self-interest. This is why in the UK, I don't know, Greg, where are you based? In the UK, our Parliament has an independent pay body that recommends. I remember when I was a teacher, though, we had not had, because of austerity, we had no real-term pay rise for 8 years, right? In fact, we'd had real-term pay cuts under the last government. And we then saw the independent pay body recommend an 11% pay rise. And then the politicians and the MPs gave themselves that. And I'm like, really? Hi, we're here. Hi. So, yeah, it doesn't always work, but essentially when you have decisions that are potentially in your own self-interest as a parliamentarian, as a politician, then you should really be deferring that to third-party independent organizations. Things like redistricting in the United States, it's absolutely insane that it can get decided by states and is completely partisan. Redistricting over there should be a completely non-partisan, independent thing, and that's what the Democrats tried to pass through legislation during the Biden administration. But not a single Republican voted for that. Not one Republican voted for independent redistricting. They wanted to keep it where, because they get the advantage from that, because they can control more states. They wanted it so it was still a partisan process, and that's just completely unacceptable in my opinion. Anyway, my long goodbye there, because you get me started on redistricting and so much to say on that. Take care, everybody. I'll speak to you soon. Toodle pips. Big love.